Hi, good afternoon. Today we'll be discussing some safety issues in the home and school environment for children with autism and other developmental disabilities. This is an overview of our presentation today. We'll be discussing specific safety risks for children with autism, and we'll be reviewing prevention and intervention strategies in both the home, school, and community environment. We'll also be addressing specific challenges that missing children with special needs encounter. And then at the end, we'll review what we as a community can do to help advocate and support, as well as helping parents and educators find resources on this topic. So what are some safety risks? Those specific to children with autism include wandering, elopement, and drowning. And by definition, wandering is when an individual who requires some level of supervision to be safe leaves a safe space and is exposed to potential dangers such as traffic, falling from a tall building or place, or an encounter with a stranger. Elopement, which is pretty similar, is the repeated attempt to leave a designated area without permission or supervision. And throughout the webinar today, we'll be discussing some of the safety strategies that can be put into place for both wandering and elopement. There is also the safety risk of drowning, which is death resulting from suffocation within 24 hours of submersion in water. And that can be as a result of wandering or elopement. So a lot of these safety tips that we'll be discussing can be preventative of all three of these risks. Here are just some statistics regarding wandering. 58% of parents reported wandering as the most stressful behavior their child with autism displays. So that's really important to review just in terms of how this affects individual family members and not only the child. In relation to the child, one study found that 46% of children between the ages of 4 to 7 were at risk of wandering, whereas 21% between the ages of 8 to 11 were at risk. And over a third of children with autism who wander are rarely able to communicate their name, address, or phone number. A study found that 62% of parents also reported that the behavior prevented their family from attending or enjoying activities outside the home due to fear of wandering or elopement. There's also some statistics regarding elopement. According to the National Autism Association, 49% of children with autism attempt to elope from a safe environment. Children are 8 times more likely to elope between the ages of 7 to 10 than their typical developing peers, and that's kind of what we saw before in the previous slide. And 43% of parents reported that the behavior prevents them from sleeping at night. Studies also found that most common locations from which a child eloped were from an individual's home, which was 74% of the time, a department store, which was 40% of the time, and the classroom or school environment, which is 29% of the time. So a lot of different environments that we'll need to address just in terms of safety strategies that can be put into place. While reviewing some of the safety risks, we also found some statistics on drowning. In 2011, accidental drowning accounted for 91% of total deaths for U.S. deaths for children with autism subsequent to wandering or elopement. 27% of parents reported a close call of drowning after their child eloped. So these are some scary statistics, definitely some concerning behaviors. So what we'll talk about is how to prevent such risks first. One way to do so is the use of ABA therapy, or applied behavioral analysis. ABA therapists, or a BCBA, which is a board-certified behavioral analyst, can complete an FBA, which is a functional behavioral analysis. This FBA can be used to determine what type of wandering is what type of wandering it is, which is if it's goal-directed, or what type of triggers are involved. And once you identify these can help to develop strategies that will help your child deal with a specific trigger. And then you can include those triggers in an IEP so the techniques or strategies can be put into place at school. So studies found that using an FBA could help reduce the risk of elopement and identify the specific triggers which would help them create a strategy for success. And again, this FBA can be done and used to implement strategies both in the home and the school environment. So as we talked about before, the FBA can be used to determine if wandering is goal-directed, but there are different types of wandering. So goal-directed, just to review, is wandering with the purpose of getting to something. For example, water, train tracks, a park, a specific item, or a place of obsession. There's also the wandering type of bolting or fleeing, which is the act of suddenly running, usually to quickly get away from something, get away from a negative reaction to an event, or get away from anxiety, fear, excitement, or stress. There's also nighttime wandering, or wandering due to disorientation, boredom, transitioning, or confusion. So once you have an idea of the type of wandering that it is, it will be easier to determine what type of strategies need to be put into place. And again, talking to your therapist, talking to your BCBA can help determine that type. These are also some general safety tips to keep in mind. The first, of course, to review is to determine what type of wandering best describes your child and what triggers the wandering incidences. If it is goal-directed, you can plan for ways to your child to explore the desired interest in a safe way. For example, if the child's goal is to get to water, you can plan a time during the day for the child to play with water. And this can be done, again, in both the school and home environment. If it's also goal-directed, plan ways for your child to explore desired interest in a safe way or escape the situation in a safe way. So addressing the triggers, addressing the stimulus that causes that reaction of wandering or elopement or escape. Again, in both instances, work with your therapist. You can even involve your teachers or any therapist, in addition, your speech therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, to help put these strategies into place so that they can be reinforced in every type of environment or experience. So here's a list of risk preventions that you can do specifically in the home environment. So consider each room specific to what that means in terms of how the child is escaping or eloping. First, look at the child's bedroom and consider special doors or locks. So children with autism have a tendency to wander in the middle of the night. You can secure the room by placing a baby gate at the door or locking the door from the outside. But something to keep in mind and consider are the safety implications and having a fire safety exit plan put into place. You could also invest in a Dutch door or a door that opens separately from the top but locks on the bottom. You could consider placing extra locks that are high above the child's reach or exterior or entry doors of the home. And you can also look into portable locks such as the Guardian lock, which can be taken off when you travel. You should also consider the furniture arrangement of each room. Consider where the windows are and any escape routes that the child has. Be sure that furniture placement does not provide easy access to the windows, or door locks or other ways of escaping. You could also manipulate the arrangement of the furniture so that it makes it harder for your child to escape. And consider installing window locks and checking them often. There are also several alarm systems that you can look into. You can look into home alarm systems or battery-operated doorbell chimes on exterior doors, which are a great way to alert you if your child has left the home. You could also look into fencing. Putting a high fence surrounding your house can prevent escape and be very important in the case of drowning. Fences should be at least 4 feet high with no opening underneath the fence. Pools are something that are definitely concerning. Be wary of pool covers, though, as they may actually increase the risk of a poor outcome. What that means is, in the instance of where a child is submerged in water, the pool cover could possibly hide the child from view, making him harder to spot and save. So just be a little bit cautious when you look into those pool covers, and alarms as well. There are pool alarms that can help you determine if your child is in the pool. There's always the risk of visitors, so creating a social story to explain opening doors to strangers and appropriate reactions can be helpful. And later on in the webinar, we'll discuss what a social story means and how to create it in specific wording that you can use to prepare a child with autism. Hot water is something to consider as well, since some of our children with autism struggle with sensory issues. This may actually put them at risk for getting burned by hot water. So one way to avoid this is to regulate or change the temperature on your hot water heater. And in the case of a fire, a child with autism may be sensitive to loud alarms or the rescue team in the house. What you can do is consider taking your child to the local fire department to become more familiar with the firemen and the gear that they have. They can definitely look scary or intimidating when they're in full fire protection, and your child should become familiar with that. Consider placing special stickers on your child's window to alert the fire department personnel that there is a child with special needs inside. And look into whether or not your local fire department has a special needs registry. If not, at least visit your closest fire department so that they are aware of your child in any special circumstances. In addition to risk prevention at home, there are also some specific tips that you can do to help prevent in school. The first is to visit your child's school and classroom at the start of the school year. You can take pictures of the room and the building and create a social story to prepare your child for the environment. Also, really helpful is to look into possible escape routes and check for the locks in the windows. It's also a really good idea to check surrounding areas. For example, if you know that your child may be drawn to water, check to see if there are nearby bodies of water, nearby pools, things like that. You should also consider taking pictures of any of the environments that your child will be in, for example, the playroom or any of their other rooms. That way you know exactly what to prepare for. Consider taking it hour by hour and breaking down your child's day so you can have preparation put into place with every different type of environment that's needed. You can schedule an IEP meeting before the school begins. Be prepared to share that information with your team and information on triggers and strategies that will help keep the child safe. It may also be helpful to advocate for social skills or safety training. And definitely discuss and create a school schedule to address transition periods and supervision. There may be a gap between teachers, as we mentioned before, if your child is going from room to room or recess. So be prepared to have a plan put in place for that and discuss that with your teachers. If your child does need additional supervision, ask for ways that the school will be able to provide that. Another tip for safety in the school is to write an IEP letter. You can provide documentation from a therapist, doctor, or even a signed parent letter stating specific behavioral concerns that the school should be aware of. Include a list of interests that your child has that could be the root cause of wandering. For example, looking for pools of water. Also be sure to include if the child has an ID card, tracking device, or other things so that team members are aware if there is an emergency plan should the child elope and what that looks like. Review any triggers associated with wandering as well as any strategies that can be put into place by your therapist that could be integrated into their curriculum. And last, include a list of methods that could be used to calm the child if and when the child does elope. So we talked a little bit about including a child ID card. This is actually one that we have created. This is a scanned image of the front of our card. The slide right after is a scanned image of the back. But what you can see here is how important it is to have all of that vital information in one specific place. That way, should your child elope or wander, this is an easy way to provide all of that information at once to your first response team. This can be given to the fire department, to your police department, to your teachers. Make a couple of copies and always keep this on hand, so keep a copy for yourself. This is an image of the inside or back of the card. If you are interested in these, we have them in our office. It's something that we can send to you as well. But what's really important that I want to note here is it goes into specific details about your child. It should always be reviewed. So if your child is growing, you should have the most recent up-to-date information, a new picture, things like that. It's also really helpful here. We've included that you can make a set of fingerprints, which can be helpful for your first response team, as well as include any medications that your child's on or identifying marks. So creating a child ID card is definitely beneficial. If you don't have that, other things that you could consider are identification jewelry, which are creating bracelets, necklaces, shoe tags, clothing labels. This is especially important if your child is nonverbal and, as I mentioned before, should be updated frequently. So if you're also interested in specific tracking devices, we've listed a couple here. These are really helpful just in terms of how convenient they are to be used in the school as well as in the community. If you're going to the park, if you're going on an outside trip or activity, as we mentioned before, one of the statistics was that family members are really anxious and stressed when out in the community about the risk of their child eloping. So this can be one way to prevent that. Some things to consider, though, are specific to each tracking device. So look at battery life of your tracking device. Does the unit have to be charged? And if so, how often does it need to be charged? Can it be worn when bathing, swimming, or showering? So in other words, consider if it's water resistant. And then consider the cell service in your area. Will the tracker work in areas of your home and school? Because that's really important. You want that. And then always consider the cost, if there are monthly fees associated and things like that. There are also different tracking devices that can be used, and again, consider the limitations of each. A GPS is dependent on the availability of a network. It can provide precise locations. You can set up geofencing and be notified when your child has stepped outside the parameter, so that's really helpful. There's also a GPS, which can provide indoor coverage, whereas a GPS cannot do that alone. RF, or radio frequency, does not need to be charged, which can be really helpful, and it does not need to be removed when bathing or swimming. And then there's the UTDOA, which is a small device that upon remote activation dials 911 and reports location directly to emergency team. There are also specific programs in terms of tracking system. One thing is to be cautious of these programs. Really research the background to find out what the program entails, and if it is best for your child. You want to really consider all of the different options that you as a parent or educator or caregiver have. Some programs are Project Lifesaver, LoJack Safety Net, and Care Track Systems. These are just a couple that we found. There are several out there, so again, just consider researching and looking at what would be best for your child. We've talked a lot about the use of a social story. For those that aren't familiar, we'll go through an actual example of a social story, but really they're very beneficial in terms of helping prepare a child for an experience. And they're helpful in terms of being individualized to the child's needs. They can be specific on the home environment, so take pictures of your house, take pictures of the rooms, take pictures of your neighborhood, and then review that with your child. That way your child is very familiar with that area. It's also really helpful, again, like we mentioned before, to take pictures of the school, classroom, the playground, all areas that your child is exposed to, and then review that and ask your educators to review those social stories as well. That way, during the transitioning times, your child knows exactly what to expect, and it becomes a routine. A lot of times social stories can be used to help prepare children for specific therapies or medical visits. A lot of these can be very intimidating or scary for a child, and like we mentioned, there is a risk of elopement due to stressful situations or escaping fear. So one way to prevent that is to create a social story that will help prepare the child in advance. I encourage you to review that before and then during and then after. That way your child becomes very familiar. One thing to also keep in mind is that your child may be exposed to numerous personnel. Just in considering going to a doctor's visit, you see many people, and so it would be helpful if you had pictures of that, which can be found online, but if not, it may be helpful if you asked your therapist if you would be able to take pictures of sessions to review with your child before. This is our specific social story to visiting the Johnson Center. This can be found on our website. And so if you're interested in this, you can look at our website. We can also send this to you directly. But what it does is go through exactly what to expect when you visit our facility. And I'm using this as an example just because of the wording that is used. It is very appropriate just in terms of precise and concise language. So this is actually our mascot that's going to help show us around. Again, very child-friendly. This is a specific picture of the outside of our building. And then our mascot says this is what the building looks like. There is a garage that your mom or dad may park in. This is helpful just in terms of the front of the building. That way when your child does visit our center, they already know. They've seen this before. This is the elevator. It will take you up to the 4th floor. And then this is really good because you can actually make it a little bit interactive. Maybe you can press the button for. This is the front door to our office. Again, it does look like an office building, so that may be intimidating for a child who hasn't been here before. Like I said, it's helpful if you take pictures of the people that your child will be introduced to. That way they see a friendly, a familiar face. The first person you will see is our front desk manager. Her name is Courtney. Our waiting room where a child may stay, or even the play areas, which can be good. These are images of our kitchen. So a lot of this can just be used to walk through and to help the child in advance, and that way when the child comes, they've seen this before. Maybe you've even planned out an activity with your coordinator that you can do in the playroom, which can be helpful. So again, just introducing them to different team members that they may be communicating with. You may walk down a hallway to get to your room. This can be helpful too, just in terms of a child not knowing where they're going, not being familiar with a long hallway. And this is the clinic room where you will meet people who will take care of you. You may meet Rebecca, our nurse. She may measure your height and see how tall you are. One thing that I really want to point out here is clothing. So a lot of times we may look past how intimidating scrubs can be, or a lab coat, a stethoscope, things like that. So having that image in advance, seeing a child with that person in that piece of clothing can really help to desensitize a child to that possible fear or anxiety. The nurse may ask you to sit in a chair that looks like this. The nurse will ask, or the nurse will wrap a cuff around your arm. Again, we're just preparing them for everything to expect, and then see you next time. So this can be done in the school. A lot of this is just simple language to help the children. Okay. So there are also some things that you can do just in terms of prevention in the community. One thing is education on traffic signs. You can create social stories to review traffic signs, or you can make it educational. So take the opportunity to review when you see these signs in your neighborhood or community. As you pass by your traffic stop sign at the end of your road, notify your child and let them know this is where we stop, this is where we look both ways, and do it every single time you're in that situation, so your child becomes very familiar with the routine and how to react and respond. Other safety tips in the community, again, reviewing the social story and street signs prior, but also creating a schedule of activities that will keep your child entertained and distracted. So you could bring along iPad, bring along music or a book, and then just have that put into place. If you know that you're going to be on the road for a bit, if you know that there may be long lines at the grocery store, having these put into place beforehand can really help. There's also the use of role play, which can be really helpful just in terms of preparing a child on how to respond to specific situations. Role play specific strategies and reinforce or reward when those strategies are used. Again, review this with your therapist. Make sure that they're aware of that, and that's something that they can do as well. And then one really important thing to keep in mind is creating a wandering emergency plan and including all of those members that have direct communication with your child. So including family, including neighbors and teachers in your safety plan, so that they're well aware of what their role would be should the child elope, what they need to do. Have a plan put into place for all of those different experiences so your child feels protected when they're in school, when they're at therapy, when they're in the home. And then think about the child's individual needs and challenges, which we'll be discussing at length later. But it is really about making a safety plan that fits your child best. Every child is different. Those challenges can be different as well. So we've talked a lot about things that we can do to prevent risks such as wandering, elopement, and drowning. Well, once you've compiled these strategies, once you've looked at the underlying factors on why your child's eloping, you've completed all of these different things, it's helpful to create a checklist and to review that and to continue reviewing it and modifying it and changing it as your child grows. So an example of a checklist is I've secured my home. I have alerted my trusted neighbors on my child's wandering behaviors. I continue to reassess as my child grows and may possibly learn new ways to elope. I have a child ID card that first response team can use, and it has up-to-date information. I have identified reasons why my child is eloping and put strategies into place to address. I have researched tracking devices that work for our family. And I have created an emergency wandering plan for my family and notified all of those involved. So we've talked a lot about prevention and things that can be put in place before. But in the case that your child does elope, does wander, is at risk for drowning, what can you do at that time? So what we'll be discussing now in terms of intervention and support is how we can respond. So the first thing to consider is to know your child's reasons for wandering, and that way you can know where to search. Are they wandering because they're trying to hide? Are they seeking a place of interest? For example, is it goal-directed? Are they trying to get to something? Or are they escaping an overwhelming environment? Things like that. And then again, really helpful just in terms of the first response team is communicating that information to those that are involved in the search team. So in the case where you've taken preventative measures, your child is still eloped, there are certain intervention strategies that can be put into place. The following are specific resources that can help your local fire or police department implement these specific strategies in the case of finding an individual with special needs. So I encourage you to look at these different websites. They have great information and resources that you can share with your community. The first is the first response team or AWARE collaboration. You can find information at aware.org/lawenforcement.htm. There's also the National Autism Association Safety Initiative. You can find more information at nationalautism.org. There's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and their information can be found on missingkids.org. And then 911 is free, and we'll send an reverse 911 is free, and we'll send an automatic call to neighborhoods where a child is last seen. And you can find that information on achildismissing.org. As we mentioned before, the slides will not be sent out, so if you want more information about this, I do encourage you to follow us on YouTube, as this webinar will be posted later on, so you can get this information again. There are also specific training that as a caregiver or educator you can consider, for example, being certified in CPR and things like that. It's really helpful. Also consider information found on the autismriskmanagement.com. There's also Autism Alliance for Local Emergency Responder Training, and that's something that you can take back to your team of responders so that you can help them on how to respond appropriately to a child with special needs or autism. And that information is found as autismalert.org. There is also the Mason Alert, which is found on ready.gmu.edu/Mason Alert. And again, just to reiterate, this information will be posted again on our YouTube website, so you can get that. I do encourage you to look at that specific information and become more educated and aware of what resources are available to you. So it's great to have these strategies put in place for your intervention team, but some things that are really important to consider are the specific challenges of children with special needs and how to appropriately address them when you're trying to search for them. So children with autism generally have challenges with verbal and nonverbal communication. They may have challenges with social interactions, repetitive behaviors, and a decreased sense of fear or danger. And these challenges can be really important in determining how to create a search team that will help identify how to address these challenges and how to find a child who is nonverbal, who does have a decreased sense of fear. So consider those specific challenges when attempting to find a child with autism. Again, as parents, if you had those ID cards, if you had a wandering plan put in place, all of that information on specific interests of the child's developmental abilities, speech delay, communication, if they do or are drawn to bodies of water, all of that information is very, very valuable to your search team because they can include that in terms of their intervention and support. It's also really helpful to consider if your child hides from search teams, if they may be overstimulated by the lights or the sounds and things like that. Do you know if your child seeks smaller, tight spaces, which would help conceal them in terms of their search party? Are they unable or unresponsive to names when called? So all of that can help to create an intervention strategy that will address all of those challenges. So definitely important to review that with your team. After you do review some of this information, you can create your next step. So if you know your child is drawn to water, you would look at bodies of water first, nearby pools, things like that. Review your emergency plan with caregivers. Check for tracking devices if you have something. If your child is wearing an ID, bracelet, necklace, share that information with your team. And then, again, just review if they are sensitive to lights or noise. That way your team is aware of that information. So once you've reviewed all of this with your response team, as response team members, it's important to consider the following. So we've learned that one type of elopement is to run away from scary situations, and the rescue process might actually trigger another response to run. It can be very intimidating, can be potentially traumatic for a child. So as responders, be prepared to help the child and address any additional stressors. Use minimal restraint, maybe have a preferred item, or talk to the child about a specific interest. Ideas that will help calm the child can be reviewed with the caregiver prior to searching for your child. Getting on their level is also really important. Children respond well when you speak on their level, so consider taking a knee and speaking in a calm, soothing voice. For our kids that may have challenges with communication, it's important to use simple phrases. Avoid figurative language and practice first then language. If the child is familiar with a social story, you can also use this to explain that you are going back to his or her house. And if the social story is unavailable, again, just use clear, concise language to prepare the child for what to expect. And always, always try and either have a caregiver there or notify a caregiver so that your child's immediate connection is with that person. There are also some things that we can do just in terms of community support and advocacy. There's education and awareness. They're definitely needed to increase community and caregiver support. Encourage your school to host an Autism Safety Day. In fact, July was Autism Wandering Awareness Month, so that was definitely an opportunity to create some type of an event to help increase and enhance awareness of this risk. You can consider visiting surrounding schools or churches or daycares and providing resources or educational training on safety. And throughout a lot of our research, what we actually found was that there were some financial support programs and grants that as caregivers you may be eligible for. So that is definitely something to consider. And then we do have a couple of references, some specific that I do want to note. A lot of this information was found through different articles, different research articles, but if you are looking for specific intervention tools, there's actually a toolkit that you can print out and use both as a caregiver or as an educator, and then there's one specific to the first response team, which I highly, highly encourage everyone to look at, because that's something that as a caregiver you can become educated on, but also something that you can give to your community in terms of resources and support that they can put into place. That specific resource is the National Autism Association Big Red Safety Toolkit. It's a digital resource for first responders, and that's the one that we talked about. I do highly encourage you can find that information at nationalautismassociation.org. Again, it's their Big Red Safety Toolkit, and it's actually a PDF that you can print out. And then there's also the Big Red Safety Toolkit for caregivers. Again, can be found at the nationalautismassociation.org, and that can be used for both caregivers and educators. Right, so at this time, we do have some time to review any questions that you may have. I will try my best to get through as many questions as possible. Again, I do encourage you to also look on our website for more information on social stories or picture stories, as well as our blogs that review some of the concerns a caregiver or educator may have. I also encourage you to follow us on our YouTube website as we do post these webinars afterward, and there are a lot of previous webinars that have been posted that may be beneficial just in terms of additional information and support. Okay, so there does seem to be just a couple of questions, so we'll probably end early. Some specific to trackers, which I will go back to our resources list. And again, I do just want to reiterate, you can find this information again once we post this on our YouTube website. If it was really fast, I apologize. But actually, the Big Red Safety Toolkit has a section specifically on tracking devices and what to consider. But there was also the reference by Lewis, which were 7 tracking devices to find a lost child with autism. We didn't review all 7, so if you're interested in that, the information can be found at friendshipcircle.org, which we also used for a lot of the specific statistics that we found during this webinar. So I'll actually just leave this up for a little bit if you do want to get that information. Again, a highlighted one here is the National Autism Association. Really, really helpful website just in terms of safety protocols and things that can be put into place. Thank you for listening. And again, if you have any other questions or things like that, I apologize if we weren't able to get to everyone's individual questions, but this information can be found later. Thank you. Bye.